Consumer confidence measures the mood on Main Street. This is part of a university survey. How serious do people take this, and what are the main results from this?
They take it very seriously, especially when you look at inflation expectations in this number. Consumers had the worst view of where inflation will be in the next year since 1981, and that was not a sunshine and roses period in the American economy. We had high interest rates and high inflation, so people feeling a little grim, and they're blaming tariffs. They see what's happening. They know that the lack of planning and the lack of predictability that one of those business owners talked about is paralyzing business, and that will have knock-on effects. They're bracing for things to cost more, that they buy everyday items, and they know that these studies that show $4,700 a year extra in cost, that's $390 a month. A lot of families don't have that extra cash hanging around at the end of the month.
Yamiche, the president says his tariff policy is going really well. He said that yesterday. How are the talks with U.S. trade partners going?
Well, it's a key question. We know that the president has continued to double down and say that his policy, chaotic as it may be and inconsistent as it may be, that it is all by design and that he believes long term that this will help America. He said specifically that he is negotiating with particular countries. He talked about negotiating with the European Union as a bloc instead of country by country. We know that there are also trade representatives that are speaking to Israel, Taiwan, as well as Poland, Vietnam, Cambodia. The president saying that countries are essentially trying to clamor now to make deals with the United States, and the White House and White House officials have been saying that this is really all by design, that this is how it's supposed to work. The problem is that we've also seen mixed messaging because the president himself reversed course when he took back much of these tariffs that we left in place, that 10% base tariff on most countries. And he said it was because he was hearing from business leaders and investors who were worried and concerned. He said they were quote unquote yippy, which I think means that they were anxious about what was going on. We also know that the president promised and promised the American people that he was going to lower costs of living, even though he also talked about instituting tariffs. But there are a lot of Americans who are wondering whether or not this is going to be something that they can continue to really deal with and navigate, because costs are going to go up for everyday Americans. You add to that the fact that the president has also been talking to a number of people behind the scenes about the sort of political consequences of this, because even though he might not run for re-election, even though he's been talking about running for a third term, which would violate the U.S. Constitution, there are a lot of Republicans in red districts who are going to be up for re-election in the 2026 midterms, and they are very, very worried about what's happening when it comes to tariffs in our economy. So a lot there, but the president continuing to say that he's feeling good, even though people in his party and everyday Americans are saying that they're very anxious, Jose.
You know, Lizzie, just 2 days ago when I was learning from Christine Romans, as I tend to do, everything she tells me is a learning experience for me. But she was back then talking about, the bond market and bonds. And Lizzie, if you would explain to us why we should be paying attention to U.S. Treasuries and what the relationship was with mortgage rates, credit cards, auto loans, and the bond market.
Well, the bond market was particularly concerning because it's a reflection of the belief and confidence that the rest of the world also has in the United States. And I think a lot of people don't really understand just how much America's reliable and strong economy has been a major source of our strength and influence and power in the world, and a really big part of our own welfare here in the United States and prosperity, much like our security alliances. But now the United States is demonstrating not only that we are no longer strong and reliable security partners, but we're showing that we have a really haphazard approach to economic policy. And so what we're seeing is that other countries that have relied on investing in U.S. bonds, investing in the U.S. economy as kind of traditionally for a long time the most stable place to put your trust, are starting to pull back. Well, that's what was happening a couple of days ago. And I think the knock-on effects from there might be that the U.S. dollar stops becoming the most reliable currency in the world. We have already seen in recent years, China and Brazil have looked to try and move away from using the dollar for their trade. And I think that that's going to be something that other countries look to as well, because if you can't trust that the dollar is going to stay strong because you have no idea what trade policy is going to come out of the White House, you're going to look to insulate yourself from those risks.
And so, Catherine, there's the other issue of China owning $760 billion in U.S. debt. What kind of leverage does that give China?
So there are a number of theories for why interest rates here are going up. And one of them is that holders of debt, holders of U.S. debt, have just decided it's not worth keeping anymore. It may be related to other trades that they've had that are going wrong, essentially, and that they need to unwind, and so they're dumping a lot of treasury bonds. But another possibility is that major sovereign debt holders like China, like Japan, may decide we just don't want to get involved with the U.S. anymore. We don't want to hold their debt. And if they dump those treasuries, then what happens is that puts upward pressure on interest rates, because that means that there are more bonds for sale. The United States effectively has to offer a higher interest rate to attract people to buy those bonds again. And so they have quite a bit of leverage here. Now, China doesn't hold as much U.S. debt as it once did, and as much in the way of U.S. treasuries as it once did, but it still owns quite a bit. And if they decide to dump their bonds, and they may already be doing so, it's a little bit hard to tell from the data available so far. Yes, that will make borrowing costs higher for the United States, and by extension, many consumers and businesses whose own financial products are benchmarked against U.S. treasuries will get more expensive as well.
And so I'm just wondering, just because I don't understand, Catherine, like just recently the Spanish president said, oh, these tariffs, if the United States continues this way, it may be that we, Spain, would be pushed more towards getting our trade and having more trade with China. And so I'm just wondering, Catherine, how realistic is it for Spain or any other country to move away from the dollar? And of course, there's the dollarization of economies in Central America and in South America. But then there's also the very strong link economically between countries like Spain and the United States. How realistic is it to really turn away from that model?
It's not just Spain, as you point out. It's a lot of countries that are essentially saying, you know, the United States is not a reliable partner, whether in the trade context or the national security context or anything else. Even before Trump came into office, I think we had seen some bifurcation in world trade and world economies between either you have like U.S. compliant products and you're following U.S. dictated rules, or those of China. We already saw some of that sorting happening. Now, because we have angered so many of our allies who, by the way, themselves had reason to previously be frustrated with many of China's own trade practices, among other policies, because we have angered so many of them, we have driven more of them into the arms of China on economic issues as well as other issues of national concern. In fact, I think the most remarkable alliance that we have forged that does not include us is not Spain and China, but rather China, Japan, and South Korea, who recently had their first economic dialogue in 5 years as a result of how furious they were at the United States. Historically, those three countries don't get along so well. There's a lot of historical resentment that has something to do with economics, but mostly not, among those three countries. And we have knitted them closer together at a time when we really want those important allies like South Korea, like Japan, like members of the EU to be closer to us, so that we can put together more pressure on China to behave in ways that we think is fair or would be a better moral actor on the world stage.
Such an important point you're bringing up. Gosh, it's so critical, and people tend to overlook those kinds of things. I've also been surprised at how people have overlooked Saudi Arabia's opening relations with Iran after so many years, and the consequences and the reasons for that. But Lizzie, so the U.S. has a massive trade deficit with China. The United States has the most powerful consumers on earth. In a trade war, which of those two would you prefer to have?
Oh, I mean, I think that we're sitting pretty having a trade deficit with China because Americans get a lot out of China in terms of goods that are inexpensive and we enjoy being able to access. Now, you can take issues certainly with the fact that there have been unfair trade practices. It has harmed America's ability to manufacture goods at home. But I think if you ask every American on the street if they would like to give up all of their access to everything they receive from China in order to buy it at home at multiple times the cost, they're going to want to maintain that trade. And what we're seeing now, I think, is a lot of the world probably rooting for China to win in this standoff that we're in right now, because it's globalized kind of open trade, the enhanced open trade that we've had has made everyone richer. Now, do we need to try and lean in, and could we use some of our leverage now to push for more fair trade practices? Sure, but that's not what the Trump administration is talking about. In fact, with as low as most tariffs are around the world, it's kind of hard to see what they're going to be negotiating down with a lot of these countries. But I think China, where they're sitting, is probably in the best position to withstand U.S. pressure on this because they have such huge markets elsewhere. And don't forget that China has a massive market as well that the United States relies on, U.S. businesses and farmers rely on tremendously also. So we might have, we're importing a lot from China, but they are importing a lot from us too. And a question now is whether American businesses that have relied on that are going to be able to withstand the upcoming storm.